Vi begynner. Velkommen. Dette her det er jo et litt dystert tema, og da er det bra at noen forsker og jobber med løsninger. Og den forskeren dere skal få møte nå, Hans Peter Arp, han jobber som forsker ved NGI, Norges geotekniske institutt, og han er også professor i miljøkjemi ved NTNU. Og Hans Peter han har i mange år vært en viktig stemme når det gjelder å forstå hva som skjer med miljøgifter i naturen. Eksemplene de er dessverre mange. Mikroplast, PFAS, som ofte omtales som evighetskjemikalier, og for eksempel, et litt nytt begrep, i hvert fall for meg, trifluoroacetic, TFA. Og TFA er eksempel på en miljøkjemikalier som er giftige for fosterutviklingen, og som øker raskt i befolkningen globalt. For disse miljøgiftene de finnes nå overalt. I drikkevannet vårt, mat vi spiser, og i blodet til mennesker over hele verden. Og når de først er i miljøet og i kildene til drikkevannet vårt, så er de svært vanskelige å fjerne. Ofte transporteres de over store avstander. Så uten tiltak så vil forekomsten av PFAS, som for eksempel TFA og andre giftige evighetskjemikalier, bare fortsette å øke og hope seg opp. Og disse utfordringene de blir i økende grad anerkjent som globale trusler. Hans Peter han kombinerer tung forskning med løsninger for et renere samfunn. I en fersk studie publisert i det prestisjetunge tidsskriftet Nature kartla han og andre kollegaer den kjemiske kompleksiteten i plast og viste hvordan vi kan lage tryggere og mer bærekraftige plastmaterialer. Det er noe som er helt nødvendig om vi skal lykkes med en sirkulær økonomi. Hans Peter er også sterkt engasjert i europeisk politikk og regelverksutvikling. For NGI så leder han et stort EU-prosjekt, Zero PM, som handler om å fjerne de aller mest problematiske miljøgiftene. Og han bidrar til viktige rammeverk som REACH, kjemikalieregelverket i EU og EØS, og den globale plasttraktaten. Kort sagt, en engasjert forsker som kombinerer kunnskap, politikk og handling, og som er en ettertraktet kunnskapsformidler. Som kanadier så vil Hans Peter holde innlegget på morsmålet sitt, men denne mannen han er tospråklig, så han svarer gjerne på spørsmål stilt også på norsk. Så vi gleder oss. Vær så god, Hans Peter. Ordet er ditt.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Liv. Thanks for coming. I'm very happy to be at Arendalsuka. It's my first time, and I saw that there's not much going on about pollution, which is an important problem, so I really appreciate you attending today. And I'm going to start this presentation with just giving a little bit of a background, what we mean when we say forever chemicals, define the problem, and then after maybe I scare some of you, we'll talk about some solutions. So first, why do they call forever chemicals that? And one way I like to think of it is that what are the traces that we have of human civilization that will probably outlast us millions of years in the future, that it was a clear sign that there was civilization here. And one will be the remnants of a space program going out into the universe. Another trace of our civilization will be the radio waves that we pop out. These were clearly generated by some life form. And another thing is this forever chemical PFAS. It's a synthetic chemical, not found in nature, not made by any astronomical process. It contains these very unusual bonds that are found in nature, these carbon-fluorine bonds. And this is what gives them this very stable property. And these will last. It's not known how they will last. They're only destroyed if they get a lot of energy blasted to them, but then they'll probably only make something smaller. So these are called per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, these forever chemicals. And they are a huge issue in Norway. Earlier this year in Klassekampen, they were highlighting the known PFAS polluted soil areas that we have throughout the country. You'll see a lot of these in our airports, but also factories or ship wharfs, and I'll go into that later. But this is a huge problem that the Milieu Directorate, they know about this, and they're following these sites to make sure that they are cleaned up, and there's a lot of money being invested into this. But that's the problem. How did we get here in the first place? Why were these forever chemicals made? Well, they were first stumbled upon by accident, when they're just doing some research and development as part of the Manhattan Project, which is where they developed nuclear bombs. They're doing a lot of a lot of innovative chemistry at the time, but then they came across this process to make these carbon-fluorine bonds, and then later they were exploring what are the potential uses of it. So we see over time they were used in more and more products, and there was more kind of chemicals from this PFAS family. I can highlight some. A lot were used with, shouldn't go there. A lot were used with firefighting foams because they would, when mixed with water and sprayed on a fire, they made this very nice foam, or how they mixed with water, which was the most, it's still today the most effective way of putting out a fire, which is why it was used in airports and in military bases, and they used it off for their training exercises. So they were spraying this PFAS everywhere into the soil. It's also used in food contact materials because these things have a very unusual property that they're both hydrophobic and lipophobic, meaning when you have a surface on them, water doesn't like them, oil doesn't like them. An example where you might see that is a Teflon pan, which is one of the first things on this sketch here, because nothing, like it's not true that nothing sticks to it, but it sticks less. It's one of the materials where things stick the less. But then they also started putting this on paper plates, on all kinds of food packaging to make them grease resistant, and then there was more of these being introduced into the world. And that's why we end up with a lot of the soil hotspots that we have now around airports, around oil and gas facilities where they're also using PFAS to take care of fires, chemical industry, and around these factories where they're making grease-proof packaging. And also in agricultural areas, some can be contaminated with PFAS if they're getting wastewater sludge from a contaminated site. So there are some agricultural areas that also have PFAS, and there's even some pesticide formulations that can contain PFAS. So what happens when they enter soil? So this is just showing the exposure pathways. So we can just, for illustration purposes, think of this sludge scenario that I presented. So the tractor here is putting some PFAS-contaminated sludge on the soil. This will leach because it is mobile. They're polar. And some of these will go up into the plants. So we can get an exposure pathway through consumption of plants grown on this soil. This can also go into the Beitedeer, or the animals that are eating the plants grown, so we can also get a pathway to our food. But also in some very polluted areas, animals can get sick from eating too much of this. Going forward, we can also have runoff into our aquatic areas, our fjords, our lakes. And we also get leaching into the groundwater, which is a huge issue because we always think groundwater is pure, but these chemicals will leach into the groundwater. They won't degrade. They'll just, they in some areas accumulate in our groundwater resources. That too can be leading to our freshwater resources, our lakes, again, contaminating our fish, and then again, that's coming back to us either through the water we're drinking or the food we're eating. So we're getting multiple exposure pathways from our diet because we are putting this chemical in soil in some areas. And the new one that right now I'm spending the most time on of the PFAS is this one. It's trifluoroacetic acid. It's one of the smallest PFAS. And this was a study in 2021 that they did in Denmark, where they have this national groundwater watch program where they were sampling each groundwater well over the entire country. And 219 of the 247 wells, they found this one chemical, TFA. So it's considered it's a national issue. This was a huge explosion in Denmark when they found this. And they also found when they aged how old the groundwater was, we see this very rapid increase in our drinking water, or in Denmark's groundwater. So that's not the only place where they saw TFA increasing. So this was a study of Arctic ice cores. And they also saw since the 90s, similar to that Danish groundwater, that the concentration of it has just been skyrocketing, more than any other PFAS. And also with this plant uptake, right, this mobility of it, this is a survey of trees in Germany, like spruce trees and poplar trees. And they're finding in the needles of the trees in Germany, like from remote regions, they're seeing also this rapid increase in TFA in the needles of the trees. And that's not all, it's in the food as well. So this is an Austrian survey of wine, and they saw in the past years the concentration of TFA in their wines, be they organic wines or red wines or white wines, they're all getting more and more TFA. Where did this TFA come from? Why are we seeing this increase since the 1990s? Well, the main sources are refrigerants that were introduced by the Montreal Protocol. You might have known the Montreal Protocol. This is one of the most internationally successful environmental regulations responsible for phasing out chlorofluorocarbons, which basically saved the ozone layer. This was great, but they, through various treaties, they kept looking for new replacements to replace CFCs, and now this is the most dominant one on the market that you see on the screen here. And this is converted in the atmosphere to rain, so to TFA in rain, and it's just becoming deposited globally. This is why we have this increase in the Arctic and in many regions as well. Another source is pesticides. There were recent pesticides introduced on the market, mainly used for herbicides to get rid of weeds, but when they put these, especially in potato fields, but when they put these in the soil, they also degrade to TFA. And finally, there are new pharmaceuticals that we use, such as Prozac or this anti-diabetic sitagliptin, that also can degrade into sludge and form TFA. So all these new sources are coming together to show this increase in our soils. And now also that's no surprise when you see this, that even in our bread, in our pasta, in our baked goods, we are seeing more and more TFA in basically everything we eat, whether it's organic or not. And what there's very few studies on is the TFA in our blood. There's no Norwegian survey of TFA in blood. There's around the world, there's more surveys going, so we can get a benchmark. But there have been surveys in China and the USA, and they find it, of course, is ubiquitous in the population because they're getting exposure from all these places. What are the health effects of this? Well, these are the conventional PFAS on the left side. These have been the most well-researched, and these are associated with many different health problems, from immunotoxicity, which means how well a vaccination campaign will work on a population, to cancer, to thyroid disease, to liver damage, to effects on reproduction and fertility. There has been relatively less focus, but now increasing focus on the effects of TFA. And there's also just some concerns being raised there. There's a study now that's getting a lot of attention showing that rabbits that were exposed to high amounts of TFA have offspring with malformed eyes, for instance. And it's also associated with liver damage. So it's a lot of work now at the European level to try to find out their health problems. And I'm always arguing to address this increasing pollution before it's too late. And right now, this is an overview of the soil pollution of PFAS in Europe. So this was a project that I helped out with. It was organized by a network of journalists who were ringing people to try to find out where are the PFAS polluted sites in Europe, where are the potential sites. So the red sites are the ones that have confirmed PFAS contamination, the blue ones potential because of previous land use. There's no data yet to confirm if they're polluted or not. But we did some estimations. what would be the cost of remediating Europe's soil with today's technology. And if we're just looking at the conventional PFAS, not TFA, it'd be around 95 billion over the next 20 years, which you can convert to 6% of the oil fund. But if you had to remediate TFA, which is extremely expensive, and using conventional technology, I wouldn't recommend it because that's very disruptive. That'd be 1 trillion over 20 years, or 61% of the oil fund. So that was the scary part. So now I'm going to talk about the more optimistic part, and that's the solutions that we're working towards. And that's sustainable remediation, sustainable innovation, and sustainable regulation. I will spend a bit more time on remediation because we're doing a lot of work on that currently, but we're also working with innovation and regulation solutions. So let's go back to our contaminated soil with PFAS. So one part of our sustainable remediation solution is to use the plant uptake part as part of the remediation. We don't want it to go into our crops, but maybe we can plant things there that we can use to extract the soil. I'll have a separate slide presenting that. I'll just show you the overview of what we do. And then the next step is, what do we do when we have these PFAS-contaminated plants? We want to convert them into a kind of a charcoal that destroys the PFAS. So we're left with a charcoal or a biochar that is PFAS-free. What do we do with that biochar? Well, we think there are many commercial opportunities for that biochar, but specifically for PFAS, we put it back into the soil to stabilize the PFAS. So I'm going to walk down each of these steps in a bit more detail. But we call this whole thing the virtuous cycle because we can keep doing this again, for instance, each year, and each year the soil becomes cleaner from PFAS. So just briefly, the plant uptake of PFAS. So these are pictures from a pilot site that we are doing in Belgium, right around the site where they actually produce PFAS. And this pilot site is right in the middle of a nature reserve. And they know they've been measuring the plants for years, and they know that there was PFAS in the plants. And they even knew from their monitoring data which plants had the most PFAS. So we said, well, let's use those specific plants to try some phytoremediation to take it up. And this is from the site. But it's basically like some PFAS go up in these plants better than others. TFA goes in there quite well. So once we have those plants, we want to convert them into carbon, as I said. So the picture on the left, this is a pyrolysis unit. It's in Lindum in Drammen. It's owned by Scanship. It's called the BioGreen Pyrolysis Unit. We're using it for a lot of testing. But this is a way of also exploring innovation. How can we convert contaminated organic waste, sludge, or plants to this, with many contaminants, to this charcoal that is reduced in contaminant content. This is some optimization of this technology. Sometimes we have to add catalysts, but this is what we're exploring. And we also say there's several advantages of this technology in particular, because when you convert organic waste that would normally degrade into CO2 or maybe methane, instead you're converting it to a stable form of carbon. So this is actually a carbon sequestration technology that removes contaminants. And we think there are several market potential if you can get the volume correctly. We're using it as a sorbent because we have found that it sorbs PFAS and other contaminants quite well in water and soil. But some people are using this as an alternative to coal and metallurgy as a fuel source. And finally, for biochar stabilization, I think the best way I can explain it, we had a visit from Alexander Santorf, who's very active on Instagram and also has a PhD in chemistry, so he likes to share chemistry research on Instagram. So I'm just going to steal his story he made when he visited our labs. But so he took this picture of soil from Denmark that was very polluted with PFAS, and he also took pictures of some of our coal. This coal is actually not made from plants. It was made from sewage sludge that was PFAS contaminated. But he is talking about this property that PFAS actually has a good surface area, the coal has a very good surface area for PFAS and can soak it up. Just an example, if you're ever take some kind of a poison and you're sent to the poison center or the hospital, the two typical things they'll evaluate to do is to throw out the poison and then eat some activated carbon to absorb the remaining poison in your body. It's a similar kind of concept. We use this to absorb these organic contaminants in the soil. And this is what we've been researching. And important to note is this will not destroy the PFAS in the soil. It contains it so that the PFAS does not go from the soil to the plants or to the groundwater. And to prove that, we had a recent student of ours, Michel Hubert. He recently defended his PhD in June, and he was running these soil columns. So these holes in the ground are 1 meter deep, and we put some basic soil in there, but we also soil mixed with this carbon that we made. And then the PFAS was put on the top, and from these observations, the PFAS would just go through the soil in about 1 year. But when we amended it with our carbon, it did not go out, and we did some modeling and say it would be at least 100 years before that PFAS went through the soil. So that was pretty much our virtuous cycle method. This is it all on one figure, a little bit better graphics, but it's the same pattern. On this side, we have the phytouptake into the plants. We bring it to pyrolysis, convert it to biochar, put it in the soil. And we have some colleagues that are doing something also. They want to see if they can put some of the biochar in the feed of the animals that feed off the grass to see if this will also help depurate them with PFAS. So that's something we call a decontamination side pathway. It's not my field, but we're collaborating with people in Switzerland that were looking at that, who has worse problems than we do with PFAS. And now I'm going to go briefly into sustainable innovation. Don't have too much time to go into it, but specifically on TFA, I want to highlight one aspect of sustainable innovation. This is a professor from NTNU, Gustav Lorentzen. And he, when he saw in the 80s all these problems with chlorofluorocarbons in the ozone layer, he had the foresight to say, let's not just go for other things that are made with halogens. Let's not make these things that use fluorine. Let's just go completely using natural gases in our refrigerant system. So he patented and made some CO2, carbon dioxide-based refrigerators, and patented them. And these are the alternative, at least in a lot of applications, for these refrigerants that make TFA. So Norway, in our supermarkets, we are using refrigeration systems that do not generate TFA on the planet, whereas in other countries, they are. But this is an example of how we can innovate outside of the PFAS space to find new solutions. And also, we are working with industries that are looking at alternatives to PFAS to measure the sustainability of their alternative technology and compare it with the previous ones to look at how to facilitate that innovative transition to get away from PFAS. And of course, a sustainable regulation. Norway and Europe are some of the most ambitious countries in the world when it comes to having an ambitious PFAS regulation. Norway was one of the 5 countries in Europe to push for a general PFAS restriction, which would include getting rid of F-gases like TFA. This is in the domain now of the European Chemicals Agency, and it's being discussed, and there's been a lot of call for research and collaborations to see how they could facilitate this. So we are working very, very much with the Norwegian and the European Chemical Authority to help them with this transition. And I can also say recently, this just happened in June, the Danish, they recently banned 23 pesticides because of this issue that it makes TFA. So they were their first country to do this. We do not yet know the TFA situation from pesticides in Norway or what will be the effect of this, but this is also a major data gap that we also can look forward to for having a more ambitious regulation to tackle the PFAS situation, such as getting rid of these pesticides in Norway and also monitoring them better. Okay, so I'll just get back to the 3 solutions: sustainable remediation, innovation, and regulation. And to close, I just want to thank these European projects that have funded most of my research and the slides that I'm presenting now: the Zero PM project, the Aragorn project, and also 2 big projects from the Norwegian Research Council, Sludge Effect and VOW. We have a lot of material if you want to find more information about what we do, and I can also highlight this paper we have here on the virtuous cycle. And so I'm looking forward to any questions on PFAS and its solutions. Thank you very much.
Tusen takk, Hans Peter. Jeg regner med at det mange spørsmål. Nå må det være raske. Hånda I været. Øydis kollega går rundt med mikrofon.
Takk. Vil du ha spørsmål på norsk eller
Det går helt fint, ja.
Jeg kommer fra NG, Nordic, Norsk Gjenvinning, leder for teknologi. Og vi ser på PFAS og destruksjon av PFAS, og foreløpig først og fremst fra vann, eller av sidevann egentlig. Men hva vet man om destruksjon av PFAS? Du var så vidt inne på det her, og du nevnte pyrolyse 500 grader, men hvor mye studier finnes på og beviselig faktisk destruerer PFAS?
Ja, ikke nok. Jeg kan si det også en mye datagap, for jeg også finner spesielt med ting som sigevann eller vann. Det mye teknologi på markedet nå, men det ikke gjort en massbalanse til å se, den PFAS egentlig borte? Til å vise det egentlig borte, du må for eksempel ha kontroll med hvor mye fluor I system. Jeg kan si noen teknologi, jeg bare tenker de bare introduserer PFAS I lufta. Vann klar, men den PFAS fortsatt der. En andre, for eksempel reverse osmose, det litt som de tar alle salter ut, de kan ta alle PFAS ut, men hva gjør de med den saltet? I mange lander, for eksempel Nederland, de bare dumper det I havet, så det ikke borte. Så det for meg det en viktig designkriterium å spørre om hvor din dokumentasjon at du har fjernet PFAS. Og det en ting jeg også jobber med den vannrensingssektor, og hvis du har spørsmål, kan gjerne ta det etterpå. Ja. Ja. Ja.
Vi rekker et spørsmål til.
Hei, Bjørn Stokke fra Statsforvalteren I Agder. Du snakker jo om at I Norge, det var mye snakk om opprydding, men det jo viktig å gjøre noe med kildene her da.
Ja.
Og så snakker du om at I Norge så brukes det CO2 I kjølesystemet, hvis du forstod det rett.
Ja.
Hvorfor gjør ikke alle det, skulle jeg si? Hvorfor holder folk på PFAS? Det noen økonomiske spørsmål rundt det, eller...
Ja, jeg tror hvis vi bare snakker om, for eksempel, først helt enig, kildekontroll det absolutt viktigste. Når jeg snakker om tiltak, det bare for den oppryddede PFAS som allerede forurenset, men vi må stoppe den PFAS-forurensning. Spesielt med disse lock-in effects, jeg tror det en veldig viktig del av den, fordi alle kylingssystem, for eksempel I alle biler, med den CF-gasser, det bare en en-til-en-erstatning. De må ikke skifte den teknologi, de må bare pumpe ut den CFC, den klorofluorokarbon, og kommer inn med den F-gass, en ikke forandret teknologi. Det biler, Volkswagen hadde en bil, og det andre bil som bruker disse CO2-systemer, men det liksom en helt ny teknologi, en bilindustri skal si, og den bilen skal være alt for dyrt, det skal være 2000 euro dyrere å kjøpe en bil, så det bare det en markedreaksjon. Men det liksom en markedterskel vi må komme over, fordi kanskje vi kan finne løsning til å finne de lock-in effects I det markedet. Det vil ikke skifte teknologi, men vi har løsning. Det bare den politiske og økonomiske terskel vi må gå over. Ja.
Var det noen flere hender I været? Ellers så har jeg et spørsmål. Som forbruker, jeg har teflonstekkepanne, jeg har en gammel Gore-Tex-jakke som henger I skapet, og som jeg bruker når det regner.
Ja.
Skal jeg kvitte meg med det, tenker du som forsker?
Ja, jeg får det forbrukerspørsmål ofte, og hva jeg sier alltid, ikke anbefaler å kaste ut en teflonpann eller en Gore-Tex-jakke og kjøpe en ny jakke på grunn av den mest forurensning fra dette jakka skjedde når det var laget. Den største forurensning fra teflon på den stedet hvor de har laget teflon. Så den forurensningen har allerede skjedd. Så jeg sier bruker den teflonpanne og Gore-Tex-jakke så langt at det holder. Men når det tid, når det helt utslitt, du må kjøpe en nye, ikke kjøpe en Gore-Tex-jakke eller teflonpanne, kjøpe en alternativt.
Og så et spørsmål. Der kommer det et fra sånn. Da du viktigere enn mitt spørsmål? Nei, det veldig fint.
Nei, det kanskje litt faglig spørsmål igjen, da, men finnes det en forskning, eller det en forskning for tiden for å se på billigere, enklere nedbrytningsprosesser av PFAS-produkter? For det som finnes i dag ganske kostbart. Det energikrevende. Ja. Finnes det noe innen på surfaktant, biologi? Altså, vi vet jo at det veldig vanskelig å bryte ned, men jeg har lest noen dokumenter etter hvert nå som kan påvise også biologisk nedbrytning av PFAS. Så det finnes kanskje en vei.
Ja, det en veldig viktig spørsmål. Jeg kan bare først snakke om pyrolyse, fordi det hva vi gjør. Når jeg sier 500 grader på min folie, det var litt som optimistisk. Akkurat nå det mer 800-900, men den nye forskning viser at vi bruker katalysator, kaliumoksid. Vi kan redusere temperatur vi trenger. Så det alltid optimisering. Biologisk tiltak til PFAS er alltid skeptisk til, fordi det ikke så enkelt, men med unntak, jeg tror man kan lage en spesielt bioreaktor som må jobbe på en anoxisk forhold. Jeg ikke tenker vi kan sette ut en mikrob som kan destruere PFAS, og jeg kan forklare hvorfor. Men jeg synes det også veldig viktig. Når du finner noen som kan fungere, neste spørsmål hvordan vi lager det billigere. Så jeg tror det også en viktig fokus fremover. Ja.
Hadde vi et spørsmål til her? Mannen i gul jakke.
Ja, det veldig godt. Rolf Jacobsen, Exit, driver som innovasjon og produktutvikling. Når vi går til kundene våre, innovasjon, og med Sintef, med Statens vegvesen, Bane Nor og alt dette, så har jeg aldri hørt spørsmålet om PFAB. Aldri et spørsmål om produktet inneholder noe PFAB. Det burde jo være en selvfølge at det kom inn i utvelgelse, så gir poeng om det ikke PFAB i det, for eksempel.
Ja. Jeg kan se også, det kan også være det også en forskjell med Norge og andre lander. Fordi jeg tror at PFAS ikke kjent som den problem det som i andre lander. Jeg kan bare gi en anekdot. Når det var den historien med den bildet av alle de PFAS-forurenset steder i Norge, i Europa. Det var nummer 1 på nyhetssaker i Tyskland, nummer 1 i Frankrike, nummer 1 i Sverige, nummer 1 i Danmark, men på Norge det var veldig få kliks på dette. Så folk ikke her kjenner den, men den europeiske markedet kjenner det veldig godt. Så de ser på løsninger. De skal komme til Norge etter hvert. Ja.
Tusen takk, Hans Peter. Tusen takk til dere som møtte opp. Det begynner et nytt arrangement her nå om 10 minutter. Vi har en bredde i arrangementene våre, så nå går vi fra kjemikalier til havvind. Så veldig hyggelig hvis dere blir med oss videre, som de sier på, er det ikke NRK eller er det P2? Bli med oss videre. Tusen takk.